welcome back everyone, it's Maximus. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you stopping by. So, today we are talking about main battle tanks again. And, finally, I have got round to the beautiful Russian T-72 main battle tank. Now, in this video you will notice not all T-72s shown in the footage are Russian, and that's obviously because this tank is so widespread across the globe in terms of its usage. Now, I have to admit, I've been very nervous making this video. It's one of those tanks where you really don't want to insult its heritage. It's been such a formidable main battle tank around the world, you really don't want to piss off the people who have also fallen in love with this tank, because I myself love the T-72. Now, as always, I'll go through my video and the three basic concepts that I run with. A little bit about its history, because if I was to talk about this vehicle's history for a very long time, I'd be here for about 3 years. It is drenched in history. Secondly, I'll go over its specifications and its features, and finally I'll put my own spin and opinion on what I think of the tank. So, first of all, let's just say that the T-72 is pretty much the most widely exported second to third generation main battle tank on this planet. Fact. They are everywhere. Its origins dates to the Soviet Union's military expansion during the Leonid Brezhnev's premiership. From its Object 172 prototype to the present, an estimated 30,000 T-72s have been made between Nazizhgil and Mahazlev plant in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and Poland, and the former Yugoslavia, India, and Iran. Now, according to certain sources, one in particular, Forecast International, says that the Russian Federation maintains the largest fleet of T-72s currently, with 13,000 of them left over from the 1990s and between 4,000 to 6,000 mothballed as reserves, until Moscow decides to scrap these vehicles. The Russian T-72 main battle tank was produced at the Malzev HMB plant based in Kharkov, Ukraine, and at the UKBM Nazizhgil Russian Federation, and produced under the license in a number of countries. It first entered production in, surprisingly, 1972. The T-72 originated as a design to counter the expensive nature of the technologically advanced T-64 of 1963. The T-64 was the primary spearhead of the Soviet main battle tank and introduced the D-81T 125mm smoothbore main gun. To this point, Western offerings relied on the rifled 105mm system and had since gone to adopt the 120mm smoothbore design themselves. The T-64 also coupled the 125mm main gun with an automatic loader, which reduced the crew size to 3 and contained an overall operational weight to manageable levels while promoting a reduced low profile on the horizon. The prototype T-72 was born as the Object 172, which evolved into the modified Object 172M. Evaluations of this new vehicle were undertaken in 1971 and concluded the tank to be functional and capable, leading it to its adoption as the T-72 for the Red Army. The T-72 was first unveiled to the public in 1977 on the May Day parade and, amazingly, would retain its frontline status until the collapse of the Soviet Empire in 1991. Externally, the T-72 followed a tried and true doctrine of decades-long Soviet tank design. Much attention was always given to the very low profile from any angle, and the additional adding of an autoloader mechanism lessened the crew turret to only 2 personnel and the driver in the front center of the hull. Western tanks generally utilised the main loading system of a manual loader, which required the 4th crew member and the 3rd person in the turret. The auto-loading feature was extremely technologically advanced for its time. It devised a carousel-type arrangement containing the charge in an upper rung and projectile in a lower rung, brought together at the breech. The T-72 represents a combination of efficient design with a powerful main gun. As the successor of the T-64, a model that was never exported outside the Soviet Union, the T-72 chassis hull layout were quite revolutionary for its time. The tank maintained its low profile and dome turret, common amongst most Soviet tanks throughout the Cold War. However, the thing that really did separate this tank apart was that 125mm smoothbore 2A46 main gun and its autoloader with the 22-round magazine. The additional rounds were stored in the 3-man crew compartment, totaling its load to 39 rounds. When engaged in combat, a well-trained crew can fire roughly around 8 125mm rounds in a minute. The T-72's cramped interior reinforces the fact that Russian tankers really had to operate their vehicles in relative discomfort that may render them a little less ineffective in prolonged missions. However, in this day and age, it really wasn't cared for. They wanted to get as many tanks on the battlefield as possible, and crew comfort really wasn't on their top to-do list. The T-72's driver sits in the front of the vehicle, exiting and entering via a circular hatch above the distinctive V splash guard, which is, as I said, distinctive. The V splash guard is one of the key features prominent to seeing that it is a T-72. The driver then runs the tank using 2 levers and a 7-speed gear stick, with only a detachable TNPO 168V periscope for visibility, which isn't much, guys, especially with such a low profile vehicle. A separate night vision periscope was also provided. This is why drivers frequently poke their heads out when on the move. It's not common that you would see these vehicles hatched down for the fact that it was very difficult to see when trying to look through the periscopes. The gunner and commander are within the turret. All sights, switches and systems are within arm's reach and designed that way so that they can be used in both pitch black and in potentially an NBC environment. I don't know if you've ever been aware when inside a vehicle with a gas mask on, but it can be very difficult to see where switches are. The commander has the best access to either of the machine guns at his disposal. A turret-mounted 12.7mm NSV and a 7.62mm PKT beside the 2A46 smoothbore main gun. During the 1970s, the T-72's armour was substantial and resistant to most anti-tank weapons like the M72 Law or any recoilless rifle. In keeping with the Soviet approach to the tank design, a cast-round steel turret allowed for a very strong frontal armour, but very strong frontal armour only. The cast steel on either side of the T-72's main gun had a thickness between 350 and 380mm. The slope glacis of the T-72 was a welded slab of rolled steel that sandwiched an additional glass-reinforced plastic layer set at a 68-degree angle. This gave at least 550mm of armour on the upper glacis and 80mm on the lower segment beneath the tank's headlights. The flanks of the sides of the T-72 consisted of rolled steel plates that were quite thin, just 80mm on the upper half and 20mm behind the road wheels. The hull's bottom and the rear of the engine compartment only had 20mm of thickness. On paper, the T-72 could absorb frontal direct hits from a 105mm tank round, but there are sources that believe that this claim is really lopsided considering the battles fought in June 1982 between Israeli tanks and Syrian T-72s in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. The rest of the tank is impervious to most small arms and even 25mm cannon fire. Should a Russian-made RPG-7V, whose warhead could actually burn through 11 inches of steel, score a direct hit on a T-72 without ERA or explosive reactive armour, it is said that it wouldn't penetrate the armour or the glacis, unless, of course, a tandem warhead is aimed at the vulnerable part of the vehicle. The larger RPG-29 is fully capable of knocking out T-72, as well as most third-generation main battle tanks. Besides, though, no tank really is invincible, and in 2013 a Syrian Arab Army T-72 was destroyed when a rebel slid a hand grenade down its barrel. Later variants like the T-72B or B3 equipped with the Contact 5 panels can withstand anti-tank guided missile hits, and perhaps a very poorly aimed 120mm heat round. The T-72 might have a revolutionary main battle tank once, but really the rigours and ravages of the past 40 years have really served its purpose to expose its weaknesses. The original shortcomings form the basis for every T-72 upgrade. There's an extremely uncomfortable interior, a smaller diesel power plant compared to most NATO tanks, a low and round turret that prevents the main gun from adequately depressing, composite steel armour that performs inadequately really against current anti-tank guided missiles, poor accuracy in certain environments when thermal gun sights were not available, an autoloader whose efficiency at some times was contrasted by the risk of exploding the whole tank when its magazine is struck by a projectile. However, what can this tank do, and why has it been so prominent, and why has it done so well through the history? The original T-72 that caused a stir in the West ran on a 6 road-wheel power configuration by a 780 horsepower V12 diesel engine and could travel at around 60 kilometers an hour on rough terrain. Guys, that is very, very fast for a main battle tank of that day, and this is one of the key attributes for the T-72's strengths. It is bloody fast and it is bloody agile. It can go just about anywhere, guys. Its torsion bar suspension made for very clunky movements at top speed, but it did emphasize on its ruggedness. It could go anywhere, take the bumps, and keep on going. Although the engine exhaust was exposed, the Russians were clever enough to retool it as a smokescreen. Yes, just like most tanks nowadays, they can actually produce diesel onto the exhaust to give them a screen of smoke that will actually allow them to retreat. And yes, the vehicle was protected with a nuclear, biological and chemical warfare protection system. This allowed the crew to still operate the vehicle if there was potentially some sort of chemical threat. And let's be honest here guys, this vehicle was pretty much primed for the Cold War and potentially World War III, and it was no holes barred. If they were going to go into all-out nuclear / chemical warfare against other vehicles, it was definitely an option, and you know, they wanted to protect their crews, and rightly so. One of the key attributes that failed on this system though was the autoloader. It kind of chewed into its capability of being able to protect itself in that environment. Every time a projectile was fired, an empty casing would have to be ejected out the back. This actually exposed the vehicle's hull and turret to allow that chemical to get inside. Only momentarily, but enough to cause it some potential damage to the crew inside if they were not correctly NBC'd up. The T-72 utilised the 125mm smoothbore gun and could fire a healthy dose of projectile of around 39 maximum. This included the HEAT HEFS, or High Explosive Anti-Tank Fin Stabilized, the HE Frag, or High Explosive Fragmentation, and the APFSDS, or Armored Piercing Fin Stabilized Discarding Sabot. Common to other Soviet tanks, the T-72 main gun could also fire a guided anti-tank missile from the barrel. To counter any potential armoured or unarmoured battlefield threat, usually a mix of projectiles was carried by all T-72 tanks to allow them to pretty much engage just about anything. Now, in terms of variants, the T-72 obviously had a lot of different models. The initial production models of 1973 were pretty much known as just T-72. The Ural name sometimes is also associated to these vehicles, and they were fielded with an optical coincidental rangefinder. This mark was then followed by the improved T-72A of 1979, which featured a laser rangefinder and an electronic fire control system for improved accuracy on the move. Additionally, frontal protection was improved through the use of composites. The T-72A was designated the T-72M, or modernized to Warsaw Pact inventories, and the export version became the T-72G. The T-72M1 was the T-72M with increased armour, and the T-72AV was given the explosive reactive armour blocks to furthermore produce best protection. The T-72AK proved a command tank with increased communication equipment. So I won't go too much in the different designations and models, but you're probably wondering, Matsimus, why has this thing lasted so long? Well, owing to its popularity in modern conflicts, the T-72's combat record is a matter of interpretation. On one hand, so many have been destroyed in combat. It doesn't help that the armor protection along its rear and flanks was pretty much inadequate. On the other hand, developing countries prefer the T-72, and like the Russians are finding ways to currently improve it. Here's the thing, one of the greatest things that the T-72 has on its side is it's affordable. A T-72 could be delivered to a client for as little as $500,000 per tank. New versions cost nearly $2 million each, perhaps more, or potentially perhaps less. The T-72 remains a fearsome adversary, as well as its recent played significant role in Ukraine's war with Russia. Simply, it doesn't need all this high-tech technology. If it has a 125mm gun, can move quickly and engage targets, and shoot and skew, it's still a formidable main battle tank. I mean, let's put it this way, the US, for example, is still helping to actually improve the fire control systems for the Iraq new T-72s. Even Israeli firms such as IMI, whose expertise with armoured vehicles is pretty much unrivaled, can be contracted to modernise the Soviet-era T-72s. Ethiopia, Angola, Sudan, South Sudan and Venezuela have paid for hundreds of T-72s to bolster their own ground forces. The continuous adoption and improvement of the T-72 is incomparable with any other main modern tank. Iran is recognised as the last manufacturer of the T-72 with its own licensed production ending in 2012. Even developing countries that can really barely afford to feed their own people are still buying these things. It isn't a stretch to see the T-72 continuing in future battlefields somewhere else. So really guys, overall the T-72 is one of those tanks that has just lasted through the ages, and it will for a lot longer, I can almost guarantee it. And it is because of that main reason. It just costs a lot less than some of the more highly modernised, highly effective main battle tanks out there. Countries don't need these high-tech weapon systems to engage what they need them to engage, and this is similar to the conversation I had previously about the close air support role. There's no point spending billions and billions of dollars on these high-tech pieces of equipment if they're not going against other high-tech pieces of equipment. The tanks that most of these countries are buying as a T-72 are being utilized to engage other T-72s. And yes, you'd think, well, why would they not buy better? Well, because they can't afford it. And the T-72 is one of those legacy vehicles because there are so many made that they can buy off the shelf, ready to go. Everything's set and ready to go. And there are many distributors and companies out there willing to upgrade these tanks to allow them to better themselves, to allow them engaging targets better, etc., etc. The fact that this tank continues to roll to this day is incredible to me. I've got to admit, its mobility and speed is one of the key things I love about the T-72, just the speed of these things and how well they cross terrain. I've seen them in Poland used by other countries and how well they traverse cross terrain compared to a Challenger 2. The Challenger 2 is this big, dopey, fat thing, which I love to death, but be honest, from a mechanical standpoint and, an engineering standpoint, it is slow, it is fat, and it does not like going through thick mud. Anything more than about 2 or 3 feet, it's going to get stuck. The T-72 will pretty much chew through most stuff, and because of its low profile, it can just go just about anywhere. Unfortunately, because of its low profile, it does have a little bit less gun depression, but I don't think it's a huge downfall for this tank. The huge downfall for this tank is its armor protection. It really does have its ass handed to it when it comes to protecting itself. Some of those millimeter thicknesses of armor thickness on this tank was just shocking to even say, let alone know. It's just very, very worrying that, most modern day countries are even starting to look at, continuing to upgrade these vehicles. Really, in my own opinion, as much as I love the T-72, it is a tank that should be really trying to get upgraded out of the picture, i.e. replaced. But it's definitely doing what it needs to do. It's being able to engage targets with that beautiful 125mm smoothbore cannon. Everybody used to say, Matsimus, do you hate autoloaders? And I gotta honestly say, no, I don't. And especially for a vehicle like this. If you can't afford to train 4 crew members, of course you're going to pick a vehicle that can mechanically load that round into the breech. So it's a big pro for this tank having that autoloader system. And, to be honest, I found it quite interesting back in those days, in an engineering standpoint, that they've gone down that route. They said, you know what? Let's go to the drawing board, design something that gets rid of an entire crew member. We can literally increase our firepower on the battlefield by producing more tanks and less crew members. You've pretty much reduced the need 25% of needing to put another crew member in there. That's impressive and also kind of scary, because if it ever did hit the fan back in the Cold War, we would have been up against thousands of these things, thousands of them. And it doesn't matter how technologically advanced your tank is or how much armor you have, you get 100 of those 125mm main gun rounds going into your tank, you're going to lose. And that was the scary thing back in the Cold War. There were so many of these things preparing to cross the border and cross the lines that we kind of knew that we would be overrun. We would have to do a retreat back as we go and try our best to utilize our technology as we retreat to stop enough of these things. And scarily enough, I don't think we would have been able to do it. So the T-72 for me always has that kind of background fear-mongering too. It's one of those tanks that if we ever did have to go against it at some point in combat, full scale, it would have done a very good job. And I still think to this day, if it even came to us, it potentially could too. And that's pretty standing for the fact that most countries still use it, and they're still upgrading it. They're still putting money into it, and that's pretty impressive. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I did not go too deep with its history, its specifications and different variants because I would be here forever. But basically you got a good overview of the vehicle, you got a little bit of its specifications and some of the history to what it was to come to be, and my opinion on it. And overall guys, I love the T-72, I really do, and I apologize if anything in this video is wrong or you wish I'd added more, but honestly I could just spout on about this tank all day because I really do have a very strong passion for liking this tank, because it's just a very, very good tank, and a lot of people hate on it, and I can't quite understand why. I think it's purely down to a couple of reports they see here and there, and they watch the TV and see T-72s getting taken out all the time. Of course they are. I mean, these are some of the most under-armoured vehicles going up against, high-tech anti-tank guided weapon systems, or even RPGs that are, within 20-30 feet That's not what they were designed to take on. They were designed to take on tanks from distance, and back in those days it was the 105mm gun they were trying to go up against. You know, when the Leopards and Challenger 2s came in and all those, you know, Abrams main battle tanks and all that sort of stuff, when that smoothbore 120mm came in, we pretty much knew straight away that T-72 was kind of doomed. Even though they're upgrading it today, back then it was kind of time to upgrade, and that's why the T-80-90s started coming out. We started to try and improve as best they could. Anyway, let me know what you think about today's video. I'd love to hear your comment and your opinion on it. Leave me a like if you did enjoy. Honestly, guys, I'll be quite straight with you. YouTube hates all of my military videos. I've got my, you know, not deemed friendly for advertisement buttons all over the bloody place, and it's just kind of frustrating. And I do spend a lot of time and effort into these videos, and I would really appreciate if you do want to support my channel to go check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description box below. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope you have a good one, and bye-bye.